And our top story this hour takes us to the Pretoria High Court, where a convicted child rapist, Nicholas Ninow, has provided his version of events that led to him raping a 7-year-old girl in a toilet cubicle at a Dros restaurant in Pretoria last year. The Pretoria High Court is beginning with pre-sentencing proceedings. Ninow blamed his actions on his drug addiction. He's also told the North Gauteng High Court that he knows for a fact that he would have never raped the child if he had not used drugs and alcohol on the day. The court earlier rejected his version that he acted impulsively when he raped the child. His legal team will have to prove substantial and compelling circumstances on why the court should deviate from the prescribed minimum sentence of life in prison. All right, so let's get reaction on today's proceedings. I have in studio with me Luke Lamprecht. He's advocacy manager from the Women and Men Against Child Abuse. Good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for coming through, Luke.
Thank you, Palisa.
Now, let's just get your reaction to today's proceedings, mitigation arguments, Ninow himself taking to the stand this morning. What do you make of the entire proceedings?
Well, I think today was just an enormously tragically sad day in court to listen to what children in our country experience when they're growing up. The difficulty is, if he was aware of his behavior, if he was aware of his substance abusing, and he was aware of the fact that he gets out of control, the fact that he got treatment and he then deviated from the treatment and relapse makes his argument very difficult, because you then can't use the fact that your childhood was difficult because you were aware of the impact it had on you and that you need to get assistance for it. But when you look at his childhood, I mean, you just have to say how tragic it was that he endured what he endured. And then because of that intergenerational transmission of trauma, we have another traumatized child in our country who now needs assistance. And he's beyond assistance because he will go to jail for life.
And what does really this do to a person? As you say that he was abused himself, that's the testimony that was presented in court as well. And what does this do to one growing up as an abused child? Because you were saying to me off air that also poses a risk of a person becoming a pedophile himself when he's a bit older. Sure.
So the big difficulty you have when children are unplanned and unwanted. The pregnancies are difficult, and in his case you have a teenage mother and you have substance abuse, an erratic attachment, a person who can't care properly for a child. It actually reorganizes the way your brain is. So in other words, the actual anatomy of the brain as well as the electricity and the chemicals in the brain. So he would never be able to respond appropriately in a social context because his brain has been wired through fear, through needing to protect himself, through needing to look after himself, through needing to defend himself. So there's an inability to take the perspective of another person because you've had to be all about yourself. So fast forward that into his adulthood and his drug-fueled, by his version, his drug-fueled brain. You've already got a brain that through trauma is structurally not great, and you add alcohol to that. I mean, your decision-making is really, really impaired. So who knows what he was actually thinking? But what we need to be clear about is he can't use his history as an excuse for his behavior, because he was aware of what he was doing at the time by his own version, and as a result now needs to take responsibility for his actions.
And one also got a sense that he was sort of trying to blame the events of the day on his addiction as well, saying that had I not taken drugs and alcohol on the day, I am quite certain that I would not have raped the child.
And that, I think, is a brilliant question, and I think it's critical to how we think about this. Generally, when we deal with sex offenders, you get three kinds of, these are now psychological defenses, not legal defenses. You get three kinds of psychological defenses. The first is they deny that they did it, and that is what happened when people barged in on him at the restaurant. Then they deny the impact, it wasn't so bad, which he hasn't really done, but then they deny responsibility. So in other words, it wasn't him doing it, it was the drugs that did it, but it was him that took the drugs. And the difficulty is whenever you have one of those three denials present, your prognosis for doing well is really bad because you haven't actually taken responsibility for what you have done. You have said it was as a result of something else that I behaved in this way. So when you look at regret versus remorse, he regrets being caught. I'm not sure he's remorseful.
That was exactly my next question to you, to say that we saw him, of course, he broke down this morning. Sure. He cried as he was explaining what happened on the day. Is that a sign of remorse? I had the judge earlier on asking the psychologist, I think, to distinguish between regret and remorse. And the judge was very adamant to say that with the evidence that's been presented before the court, there are no signs of remorse. She wouldn't really say that Nicholas has shown any signs of remorse. What do you think? What do you make? How do we distinguish between the two?
Okay. So the first thing to understand is, if you look at both the psychologist and the social worker's version, is that both of them are saying that they don't believe that he can re-enter society because he can't think clearly within a social context. So the fundamental thing around his personality development with poor attachment and the early childhood trauma is the inability to take the perspective of another person. So in other words, his ability to think into the life and the heart and the mind of the child that he harmed, the family, the society that is harmed, is completely impaired. So all he understands is that the thing that he did that was wrong, it's wrong because he's now been punished for it. And because he's been punished for it, he is now worried about his future, and that upsets him, rather than the impact on the child itself. Because when the personality is so disorganized through early childhood developmental trauma and poor attachment, that ability to see another person's world through their eyes is very badly impaired. So he appears more regretful. I haven't met him, but he appears more regretful than remorseful. And many of the sex offenders I've dealt with, they regret being caught. Yeah. They're not sorry about what they did.
And the reality, Luke, is when all is done and dusted, whether he gets his way in this mitigating processes in terms of mitigating for his sentence, whether he gets life in prison, whether he gets 25 years or more, the reality is there's a child whose life has been damaged.
Absolutely.
How does the child move forward?
Okay, so the big thing about recovery from sexual abuse is that there's a couple of things that need to take place. Number one, when you tell people they do something, they believe you, they get you help, you go and seek therapy. And part of it also is the judicial system, where the judicial system is saying there is nothing that you did. Because there was a time in Mr. Ninow's testimony where I was like, I'm not sure if he's almost victim blaming because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. You know, and what we need to say is, no matter what you did, whether you did or didn't go to the toilet with your mother, whether you did or didn't go into the cubicle, there was nothing you could do that could change Mr. Ninow's behavior. And as a result, he is completely responsible. So you can say, I'm a victim, this was done to me, and you can begin healing. And the judicial system, by sending a strong sentence, will send that young lady that message, and then she can begin her process of healing. Because while the trial is ongoing, it's just a constant traumatic reminder.
Indeed. But what do you think, how do you think the sentence will go? Life or more?
Look, if he does not get life imprisonment, I would be totally shocked.
Yeah.
By everything we've heard up to now, the only sentence, for a myriad of reasons, the only sentence that could be appropriate in this matter, not saying that he didn't have a bad childhood, but where he finds himself now with this history, he can get nothing but life, in my opinion.
All right, look, we'll leave it at that. Time constraints. Thank you so much for coming through. All right, well, there you have it. Luke Lamprecht, advocacy manager from Women and Men Against Child Abuse, giving their views on the story.